Standing at the airport curb, watching my husband Mark's silhouette vanish through the sliding glass doors, I felt a strange, unexpected sense of calm. Little did he know that as he kissed me goodbye and told me he loved me, he was walking directly into the spectacular collapse of his own well-laid plan. With steady hands, I pulled out my phone right there on the sidewalk, ready to execute the counter-strategy I had spent weeks carefully crafting. Mark thought he was jetting off to a lucrative new life while quietly stealing the roof over my head, but he completely underestimated who he was dealing with. Before I reveal the shocking email thread I found between Mark and his mother, and how I cut him off financially before his flight even reached cruising altitude, I have a quick question for you. Where are you watching this video from right now? Let me know your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. Now, let's go back to how this betrayal actually began. It all started a few years ago when I bought a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house on Elmwood Drive. I saved every spare penny for 6 long years while working as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech firm. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was mine, built on countless late-night coding sessions and early morning deployments. That house was my dream come true, a porch where I could sit with a cup of coffee on Sunday mornings, a yard large enough for a small garden, and a spacious kitchen with plenty of counter space. 2 years after buying the house, I met Mark at a tech conference. He was a financial advisor at a firm that occasionally collaborated with mine. He was incredibly charming, possessed a warm smile, and had a knack for making me feel like I was the only person in the room. 6 months into our relationship, he asked to see my place. I welcomed him in without a second thought. He stood in my kitchen, looked around, and said, "You've created something truly amazing here." At the time, I thought it was genuine admiration. Now, I know it was simply the start of his appraisal. We got married 18 months later in a small ceremony by the lake. His mother, Vivian, wore a pale blue dress that was entirely too showy for the occasion and spent the majority of the reception critiquing the catering. His father, Howard, was a quiet man, a retired mechanic who preferred tinkering with old cars. They lived in a small apartment on the other side of town. For the first 2 years of our marriage, life was beautifully simple. Mark and I both worked, split the bills evenly, and enjoyed dinner together most nights at a kitchen table I had refinished myself. I loved those evenings, the smell of dinner on the stove, and the genuine way Mark would ask about my day. But looking back, I realized that my contentment made me an easy target. The first red flag appeared 8 months before that moment at the airport. Mark came home one Thursday evening looking deeply troubled. "My parents are having a really hard time," he told me. "The rent on their apartment went up again, and Dad isn't getting many mechanic jobs lately." He paused, shifting uncomfortably. "I've been helping them out a bit financially. I should have told you." I felt a flash of anger, but I pushed it down. "How much, Mark? And for how long?" I asked. He admitted he had been sending them $400 a month since February. It was already October, which meant $3,200 had vanished from our joint account without my knowledge or consent. I told him he should have been honest with me, but I ultimately let it go, dismissing it as a temporary family emergency. 4 months later, in April, Vivian called me while I was at work. "Claudia," she said in an overly sweet tone that immediately put me on edge, "Howard and I have been thinking, it would make the most sense for us to just move in with you. There is so much unused space in your house." I was completely taken aback and told her I would have to discuss it with Mark. But when I brought it up with him that night, I realized he had already made the decision for us. "It's just for a little while," he insisted. "They're my parents, and they need our help." I was shocked that he had completely cut me out of the decision-making process for my own home, but I reluctantly agreed, foolishly believing we could set strict boundaries. They moved in on a Saturday, unloading 3 carloads of belongings. Vivian immediately began rearranging my kitchen under the guise of being helpful, while Howard spent his days invading the garage, working on an old car he had towed over. The first month was incredibly uncomfortable. Vivian would cook without asking, shooting me passive-aggressive glares whenever I expressed a desire to cook in my own kitchen. Worse, Mark suddenly started working late, trailing into the house around 9 p.m. every federal holiday and alternating weeknight. I began to notice that his phone was always placed face down on the kitchen table. When I questioned him about it, he smoothly claimed he was just trying to be present at dinner. I chose to believe him, but I started watching his movements much more closely. One Sunday morning in May, Vivian casually brought up the house deed over breakfast. "Is the property in both of your names?" she purred. "No, it's just in mine," I replied coldly. "I bought it well before we got married." She nodded slowly, murmuring that it might be something we should address legally for family planning purposes. I firmly told her the matter was already taken care of. 4 weeks after that unsettling conversation, I was hunting for a phone charger in our home office when I stumbled upon a hidden manila folder. Inside were 6 pages that shattered my marriage. The first page was a legal consultation summary from a law firm detailing how to successfully transfer a sole ownership property into joint marital ownership. The second page was a damning email thread between Mark and his mother. Mark had written, "Mom, we need to get this finalized before I leave for the overseas assignment. It'll be much easier if she signs the transfer voluntarily." Sitting there in the quiet office with the faint sound of the living room TV in the background, the horrific truth washed over me. Mark was planning to accept an overseas job, install his parents permanently in my house, and trick me into legally signing away half of my property before he left. He had been calculating this for months, weaponizing our relationship and my trust against me. I waited 40 minutes after Mark fell asleep that night. Then, I slipped out of bed, went back to the office, and photographed all 6 pages of the folder, immediately backing them up to my personal email and secure cloud storage. The next morning, I called my attorney, Mr. Thompson, the man who had handled my original house purchase and drafted the prenuptial agreement that Mark had once insisted was unnecessary. I showed him the photographs, and he analyzed the situation instantly. "The prenuptial agreement explicitly states the house as your separate property," he assured me. "Their legal consultation is purely exploratory right now, but we need to strike first." Together, we mapped out a flawless counter-strategy. I decided to play along and wait until the exact day Mark was scheduled to leave for his overseas assignment. Once he stepped onto that plane, his leverage would be completely gone. The week before his departure, Mark finally broke the news to me about the job offer, a 4-year corporate position in Dubai. He framed it as a massive opportunity for our future, casually adding that his parents could take care of the house while he was away. I listened calmly, nodding and asking polite questions about the logistics. I knew this was the final piece of the timeline I needed. On the day of his flight, I drove him to the airport. We drove mostly in silence as he rambled about the logistics in Dubai. As we neared the terminal, I casually brought up the 6 credit cards in my name that he routinely carried. He assured me he would only use them for initial setup costs and that his firm would fully reimburse him. At the departures terminal, he kissed me and said, "This is going to be so good for us." I kissed him back, held his gaze for a split second, and watched him walk through the terminal doors. The moment he was out of sight, I went to work. I pulled up my banking app and executed the final transfer, moving all but the absolute minimum balance from our joint account into my private, individual account. Next, I opened my credit card management app. I had already removed Mark as an authorized user on 5 of the 6 credit cards the previous afternoon. Right there on the airport curb, I clicked the button to remove him from the very last one. When I returned home, Vivian was in the kitchen brewing tea. "How was the drive?" she asked entirely too casually. I took off my coat, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Fine." He got off all right. "Oh, and Vivian, I know about the folder." Her smug expression didn't completely collapse, but I watched her entire posture freeze. She instantly tried to deny it, but I pulled up the photographic evidence on my phone. I informed her that I had already handed everything over to my attorney, stripped Mark of all financial access, and filed for divorce. Vivian slowly sank into a kitchen chair, the mask completely slipping. "You were never going to sign it willingly, anyway," she bittered. "The house is mine, and the prenuptial agreement makes that ironclad," I replied. "You and Howard have exactly 60 days to vacate my property." I also let her know that my attorney had already slapped a formal cease and desist order on the law firm they had been consulting. The moment Mark landed in Dubai, my phone lit up with a barrage of frantic calls and text messages. His tone quickly devolved from, "What is going on?" to, "Are you seriously divorcing me?" to, "Please think about my parents." I didn't reply to a single one, letting my attorney handle every shred of communication. Those 60 days were incredibly taxing. Vivian tried to corner me multiple times, earning her a severe warning letter from my legal team. Mark's lawyer desperately argued that his minor contributions to household bills gave him an implicit equity stake in the property, but our prenup blocked them at every turn. Mark eventually called to apologize, stammering out excuses, but the words sounded completely hollow. In May, Vivian and Howard finally packed the last of their belongings into a moving truck. As the final box was loaded, Vivian turned to me, bitter but defeated. "You're a lot smarter than I thought you were," she snapped. I simply looked at her and said, "I know. 6 months have passed since that day at the airport terminal, and here I am, sitting on my porch on a crisp November morning. The house is quiet, the divorce is finalized, and my home is legally and securely back in my hands. I may have lost a marriage, but I gained an indestructible sense of strength." As I watch a bright red cardinal land on the porch railing, I look out at my yard and smile, knowing that I didn't just survive their plot, I completely outsmarted it.